Picture this. You're 367 feet below an ice-covered pond, wedged in a freezing underwater tunnel so narrow you can barely move, and the friend you came here with is dying right in front of your eyes. But if you panic, even for a second, you'll drown too. This nightmare became reality on February 6, 2014, when 5 elite Finnish cave divers descended into Norway's Plura Cave system with one audacious goal: to traverse nearly 2,000 meters through one of the deepest, most unforgiving underwater labyrinths on Earth. Only 3 would make it back alive, and what happened next, the illegal recovery mission that followed 46 days later, would become one of the most daring underwater operations ever documented: the Forbidden Dive. The Plura Cave system sits beneath a frozen river valley just south of the Arctic Circle in Norway, carved through ancient limestone that transformed into marble over millions of years. It's not just deep, it's the deepest diveable cave in northern Europe, plunging to depths exceeding 425 feet. The water temperature hovers between 2 and 7 degrees Celsius, cold enough to kill you within minutes if your dry suit tears on the jagged cave walls. Most divers who visit Plura enter from the dry cave side, called Steinugelflaget, descending over 100 meters through a vertical climb just to reach the water. They swim in, admire the pristine marble formations, and turn back the way they came. But for truly obsessed cave divers, there's another challenge entirely: the traverse. Starting from a small frozen pond on the opposite side, threading through nearly 2,000 meters of underwater passages, squeezing through restrictions where a single wrong move means death, then ascending into Steinugelflaget, where a 90-meter vaulted ceiling rises overhead with daylight flickering through a crack in the hillside. In September 2013, 3 Finnish divers, Patrick Grunqvist, a firefighter by trade, along with Kai Kenkinen and Sami Pakarinen, became the first to successfully complete this traverse from the Steinugelflaget side. It was a monumental achievement in the cave diving community, the kind of first ascent that gets whispered about in diving forums worldwide. But they'd done it the easy way, starting from the dry cave and finishing at the pond. Now, in February 2014, they wanted to do it backwards, starting from the hardest entrance, the ice-covered pond, and navigating to Steinugelflaget. It was the ultimate test, a dive that would take 5 hours if everything went perfectly, requiring underwater scooters called DPVS, diver propulsion vehicles, to cover the distance, and demanding they descend to 130 meters, deeper than the length of a football field, while managing gas supplies according to the sacred rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is simple in theory, brutal in practice. You use 1/3 of your breathing gas getting in, 1/3 getting out, and keep 1/3 in reserve for emergencies. Because in an overhead environment like a cave, you can't just shoot to the surface if something goes wrong. The only way out is the way you came in. 5 men gathered for this expedition: Patrick Grunqvist and Kai Kenkinen, the veterans who'd pioneered the route; Jari Huotarinen, Patrick's close friend attempting the traverse for the first time; Vesa Rantanen, an experienced diver eager to test himself in Plura's depths; and Jari Usimaki, known among the group as deliberate and methodical, never one to rush. But here's the thing, and this detail would haunt them forever: they didn't do proper preparation dives. No reconnaissance runs from the pond side. No practice squeezing through the restrictions with full gear. No emergency gas caches placed along the route. As Patrick would later admit with devastating honesty, "If we had done a practice run, things would have been different. It was totally our own fault." Into the abyss. On that February morning, the team arrived at the frozen pond with a trailer full of equipment: a snowmobile, multiple DPVEs, dozens of diving tanks, dry suits, rebreathers, and enough gear to outfit a small expedition. They cut a triangular hole through the ice and split into 2 groups. Patrick and Jari Huotarinen would go first. 2 hours later, after the sediment settled, Vesa, Jari Usimaki, and Kai would follow. Patrick slipped into the water first, with Hari close behind. The plan was straightforward: descend through 500 meters of relatively shallow water, pass through a 250-meter-long air chamber where they could briefly surface, then make the deep dive. the terrifying U-shaped section that bottoms out at 130 meters. When everything goes wrong, Patrick navigated through a particularly tight restriction and looked back for Hari's light. It wasn't there. He waited. Seconds stretched, then he saw it. Hari's light waving frantically up and down. The universal distress signal. Patrick immediately swam back. At 367 feet below the surface, he found Hari in trouble. The line attached to Hari's underwater scooter had somehow become wedged under a massive rock. Hari was stuck, and he was panicking. This is where you need to understand something crucial about rebreathers. Unlike regular scuba gear that releases bubbles with every breath, rebreathers recycle your exhaled gas, scrubbing out the carbon dioxide and adding fresh oxygen. It's efficient, extending dive time dramatically. But it has a fatal weakness. If you breathe too fast, if you panic, the system can't remove CO2 quickly enough. You start rebreathing your own carbon dioxide. It's called hypercapnia, and it's 20 times more narcotic than nitrogen. Your mind unravels, confusion sets in, you make catastrophically bad decisions. Patrick could see it happening. Hari was hyperventilating, trapped in a feedback loop of fear. Thinking quickly, Patrick tried to help Hari remove a bailout cylinder that seemed to be causing problems. He moved his own scooter out of the way. "Shari kept yelling at me to come back," Patrick would later recall. "I shouted back that I won't be more than a couple of seconds, calm down." But Jari couldn't calm down. Patrick finally saw the problem. Jari's scooter line was hopelessly tangled under the rock. In a desperate attempt to help, Patrick switched Jari's breathing system from the rebreather to open-circuit bailout gas, trying to give him fresh oxygen to clear the building's CO2 from his system. It was the wrong move. In his panicked, confused state, Hari couldn't handle the switch. He began swallowing the ice-cold water of the cave. Within moments, Hari Huotarinen was dead, suspended in the water at 112 meters depth, his body blocking the only passage forward. Patrick was now alone, his friend's corpse floating before him in the narrow restriction. He tried frantically to free the body, pulling, adjusting, desperate to clear the passage for the divers he knew would be coming behind him. Nothing worked, and every minute he spent here at this crushing depth was adding hours to his required decompression time. He had a choice that no human should ever face: stay with his friend's body and die here himself, or leave Hari behind and swim toward the only exit. Survival instinct kicked in. Patrick turned and swam forward into the darkness, knowing the second team would soon encounter what he was leaving behind. The second team's nightmare. Because he'd spent nearly 20 minutes at 110 meters trying to save Hari, Patrick's dive computer calculated he would now need 6 hours and 40 minutes of decompression stops. But after 7 hours underwater, his gas was running dangerously low. He made the agonizing decision to skip his final decompression stop at 6 meters and surface anyway, knowing he was risking his life but having no other choice. When he finally broke through into the Steinugelflaget cave, he had no idea if anyone else would make it. Meanwhile, 2 hours after Patrick and Jari had entered the cave, the second team dropped into the water. Vesa Rantanen led the group, followed by Hari Usimäki and Kai Kankinen. They had no idea what awaited them in the depths. Vesa reached the restriction at 110 meters, and his world stopped. Jari Huotarinen's lifeless body blocked the passage. In that instant, Vesa had perhaps 10 seconds to make an impossible calculation. Turn back meant swimming through the deepest section of the cave with no guarantee he had enough gas. Going back would require even longer decompression than going forward. But going forward meant something psychologically devastating, squeezing his body past his dead friend's corpse in a tunnel so narrow he'd have to feel every inch of Hari's lifeless body against him. Vesa chose to push forward. It took him more than 15 minutes of nightmarish struggle to squeeze through, having to remove some of his own equipment just to fit past Jerry's body. Those 15 minutes at depth added catastrophic decompression obligations. When Vesa finally surfaced 90 minutes before his computer said it was safe, he was already feeling the symptoms: pressure building in his joints, pain shooting through his elbows and knees. The nitrogen bubbles were forming in his blood and tissues, decompression sickness, the bends. And this case would be severe enough to cause permanent spinal cord damage. Behind Vesa, Hari Usimaki faced the same horrific scene. But unlike Vesa, Jari couldn't handle it. He panicked. His breathing accelerated. The carbon dioxide built up in his rebreather system. Somewhere in those dark passages, Jari Usimaki lost consciousness and drowned, becoming the second fatality of the day. That left only Kai Kankinen trailing behind. When he encountered the blocked passage and realized Jari Usimaki was in trouble, Kai made a different choice. He turned around. He would swim back through the deepest section of the cave, back through all those passages, back to the frozen pond where they'd started. It would require every ounce of discipline he possessed. One mistake, one moment of panic, and he'd become the third victim. For 11 hours, Kai swam alone through the freezing darkness, making decompression stop after decompression stop, his only focus on his family waiting above. When he finally reached the pond entrance, he discovered a thin layer of ice had reformed over the hole. He punched through it and dragged himself onto the ice, the only member of the second team to survive. The aftermath and the promise. All three survivors were rushed to hospitals suffering from severe decompression sickness. Visa's case was so extreme he required treatment in a recompression chamber in Berlin, Germany, ultimately suffering permanent spinal cord damage. Patrick had surfaced 30 minutes before his computer indicated it was safe. Kai had pushed his body to its absolute limits during that 11-hour ordeal. As they recovered in hospital beds, Norwegian police interrogated them and shut down the cave. An elite British diving team, including renowned cave rescue diver Rick Stanton, assessed the situation and declared it too dangerous. The bodies would stay in the cave indefinitely. But Patrick Grinqvist had made a promise. He'd looked Jari Huotarinen's widow in the eyes and told her, "We would go and get them. They are not going to be left there." The illegal recovery mission. On March 20th, 2014, 46 days after the tragedy, an extraordinary group assembled in secret. 27 divers in total, 17 Finns and 10 Norwegians, sneaking equipment into the valley using trucks, cars, sleds, and snowmobiles. This time, they planned for everything. They built a 20-foot underwater habitat attached to the cave walls that could serve as a dry decompression chamber. They placed 50 backup cylinders at strategic decompression stops throughout the system. Support teams would work at shallower depths at both entrances. The main recovery team would dive from the Plura Pond side. Patrick Grinqvist, Sami Pakarinen, and Kai Kankinen. Vesa Rantanen, still recovering from his injuries, would coordinate from the surface at Steinugelflaget. At 85 meters depth, Kai had to abort. The psychological weight was too much. Patrick and Sami continued alone into the depths. At 112 meters, they found Hari Huotarinen's body, exactly as Patrick had left him 7 weeks earlier, still tangled in his scooter line at the restriction. Just 20 meters beyond floated Hari Usimaki. The GoPro cameras captured everything. The divers' torches catching the jagged cave walls, the intermittent whirring of DPVs, the sound of controlled breathing, and the moment they cut Hari Huotarinen free from his entanglement. The recovery took 5 hours of underwater work, bringing Hari Huotarinen's body through the system to the dry cave side of Steinugelflaget. The next day, they returned for Hari Usimaki, entering from the opposite side. During this second recovery, a section of the cave collapsed onto Patrick. The GoPro caught it all. A boulder falling, nearly crushing him, a terrifying reminder of how close they all were to becoming victims themselves. But they succeeded. Both bodies were recovered, and though the operation was illegal, defying the official diving ban, Norwegian authorities never filed charges. 6 months after the incident, the Finnish president awarded Patrick Grinqvist a Medal of Honor. The cave reopened to divers in March 2014, just days after the recovery. The rule in technical diving is simple. Plan your dive and dive your plan. Have contingencies for every failure mode. Never exceed your limits. But more than anything, remember that in an overhead environment, panic is as deadly as running out of air. Because 367 feet below an ice-covered pond in northern Norway, if you can't keep your breathing under control, the cave will kill you, and it will take the friends trying to save you down with you.